Okay, so I think we'll make a start. Hopefully those who are on Teams can hear us okay. You can let me know in the chat if there's any issues during this seminar, and I can try and update and try and fix things as best as I can. So thanks for everyone that's come along, either in the room or on Teams. This is the first seminar of our Wednesday external speaker seminars in the Biological and Environmental Sciences Department. And I'm delighted to welcome Catherine Thompson, who is a Professor of Landscape Architecture at the Edinburgh School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture. And you're also Director of the Open Space Research Centre. Is that still the case?
Yes,
even in your sort of semi-retirement?
Yeah. Yes, I need to change that too.
So Catherine will obviously speak about her work, but from her bio, her research focuses on the links between inclusive access to outdoor environments and quality of life, including environment behaviour interactions, landscape design for older people, children and teenagers, and salutogenic environments as well. So Catherine, over to you.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you for inviting me. It's lovely to see people here in the room as well as online. I am going to share this presentation with Tony afterwards, a PDF that you'll be able to access. So if there are bits that you don't catch or references at the bottom that you can't read, you can get them afterwards. And thank you. Yes, I'd much rather you look at the picture than at me. So I'm a landscape architect by original background. I'm fortunate in Edinburgh University to work with a lot of very clever people with different skills. So I've worked with environmental psychologists, health geographers, psychologists in neurology and cognitive aging. So although I'm presenting a mix of other people's research and our own in open space, almost all of my work is multidisciplinary and works across different disciplines. I love it. I find it really rewarding. So please don't take anything I say if I start saying I as being just me. It will be me and my team. And salutogenic environments, maybe you all already know, but salutogenic means health enhancing. So I'm interested in the outdoor environment, and there are many health concerns about the outdoor environment. And a lot of public health work goes into trying to stop all the damaging things in the outdoor environment from damaging our health. But I'm particularly interested in the things about the outdoor environment that are good for our health. And I've done a bit of work with World Health Organization and World Health Organization in Europe. And one of the interesting things is that they see the UN Sustainable Development Goals, will we reach them? Who knows? As the best way to deliver public health. So sustainability and public health are absolutely inextricably linked. And they see these as the way forward for better public health. So if we're linking good health and well-being and sustainable cities and communities, which is where most of my work is focused, then we need to think about climate action. We need to think about life on land. We need to think about reducing inequalities in order to produce good public health. And this is just one goal from Sustainable Cities and Communities that illustrates that aspiration. Whether we will achieve that by 2030 remains to be seen. And the approach we take within open space and with my colleagues, my very clever colleagues in other disciplines, is a social ecological approach to well-being, which accepts that as individuals, there's a lot of things about us individually that are unique and that influence our health. But we know that the medical profession, and we're all very grateful for them, focus on the individual. They focus on the person at the heart of this diagram, and interventions often to treat illness. What we're interested in is all the other things around those individuals that influence their health as well, but which can perhaps be used not only to treat illness, but much more effectively to prevent illness. So that's where the salutogenic environment options and possibilities are. And these are often very local to us as individuals. That first three circles, the darker blue three circles, are the ones where architects, landscape architects, planners, other people who affect policy making, social as well as physical, in the environment can make a difference to people's well-being. And that's where we have the really best opportunity, certainly as a landscape architect or in the design professions, of intervening to enhance human health. We used to think that that outer circle was something beyond our control. Sadly, we now know that we have influenced that outer circle very dramatically as well, and the global health system and climate stability is at risk, but not my area of expertise. So although it is very important and we need to contribute in any way we can to enhancing that environment, that's not the focus of my research. And a little bit of landscape history, because I can't resist it, but just I'm sure you are aware, thinking about the outdoor environment, and particularly green or blue. I talk about green space a lot, and it's short code for urban, for green and blue space, natural as well as man-made, but something where the environment is predominantly natural, where the surface is not a hard surface, but it's open to the sky. So it could be a public park, it could be a river, it could be a beach, many different areas that are accessible to human beings I would include in my shorthand green space. And urban parks were mentioned in Parliament in London in the 18th century as opportunities to enhance people's health, called the lungs of the city in the 18th century. This is an image of Birkenhead Park outside Liverpool in the northwest of England. Allegedly, the first public park bought with public money by a local authority to be made open to the public for recreation to enhance their well-being. They funded it by selling the grand houses around the edge of the park to the wealthy, but it was open to everyone. And again, the image here is from Birkenhead Park on its opening day, built to serve the several thousand workers working in Liverpool, built to serve them and get them away from the cramped housing conditions. The quotes here are about Victoria Park in London, in the East End of London, when people in Parliament were trying to argue for a public park, not just in the wealthy West End of London, where the old royal parks were slowly being made open to common folk like you and me, but in the East End, where many of the working class people were housed in very cramped conditions, that they also needed a park. And Victoria Park was constructed using money from one of the royals' indebtedness, actually, in the 18th century. And these quotes are interesting because although they are very much of the 19th century, in principle, actually, we still believe that some of this is true, that access to green space, outdoor environments, is potentially giving us access to healthier environments that will enhance our health and maybe redress some of the damage that urban living does to our health. Interestingly, Frederick Law Olmsted, a landscape architect working with English architect Calvert Vaux in North America, principally in the States, but also in Canada, produced some quotes which are remarkably reflective of current psychological thinking about, wrapped up in 19th century language, about the influence of urban environments on health. So the idea, this image is from Central Park, New York City, which Olmsted and Vaux designed. The artificial conditions of the town produce a harmful effect on a person's entire mental and nervous system and on his entire constitutional organization. Now, I'll come back to that a bit later, but there is evidence that this is pretty spot on, actually. And then this lovely quote, the image is Prospect Park in Brooklyn, considered to be Olmsted and Vaux' best example of design, outside New York City, just newly created, so the trees aren't very mature, but the quote there about how a restorative landscape that is natural looking, is rural in character, as Olmsted described it, employs the mind without fatigue and yet exercises it, tranquilizes it, and yet enlivens it. Through the influence of the mind over the body, gives the effect of refreshing rest and reinvigoration to the whole system. So that psychophysiological mechanism is being intuited in a way in the 19th century by people working to produce urban green space that will enhance health for working class populations. So that's just a dash through history, and there are many other examples I could give you, but I'll resist. Current evidence, recent evidence, and I'm lucky to work with, among other people, Rich Mitchell on a number of projects, who produced a paper showing that not only is green space salutogenic, other things being equal, including income, very importantly, we know that your income is actually the best predictor of how long you will live and how healthy you will be, still, tragically, in the Western world. But that difference is less if you live near more green space than if there's less green space in and around your living area that you can access. So you're likely to live longer and you're likely to be less ill if you have more green space rather than less. So it's salutogenic. But it's also equigenic. That difference between the health of the poor and the rich is less if you have more green space in the area than if you have less. So it's equigenic, as Rich Mitchell has suggested. And that's really important because we know these health inequalities persist in our societies, and there's a lot of interest in reducing those health inequalities, but much less good ideas, much fewer good ideas on how we do that at an economic scale that will influence large populations. So even if it just makes a small difference, but over a large number of people, that can be really valuable. So what's going on behind this? Almost all of us are more active when we're outdoors than indoors. We may not walk very far, but we're more likely to be active. You look at children outdoors compared with indoors, they're much more active. So being physically active outdoors is one of the positive mechanisms that links having access to green space and health. And certainly we can be more active outdoors in the right kind of green space. We also know that being physically active is good for our mood and combating stress. So it may be that part of the mechanism there is physical activity is reducing stress levels, and that in turn is enhancing our health. And I'll come back a bit to some of these mechanisms in a little while. We also know, and this was underlined during COVID and lockdown, and then us being allowed to perhaps meet people outdoors in outdoor environments, but not in indoor environments, that social engagement of an informal nature particularly is possible in outdoor environments in a way that you can't if you live alone and you remain inside your home. As we get older, many of us are more likely to live on our own. Social isolation is an independent health risk factor, independent of anything else. Just living on your own and being socially isolated is bad for your health. So being able to have, having a park or a green space nearby where you can go, maybe you don't know the name of your neighbour, maybe they never come to your house, but you recognise each other, you smile, you nod. There's a kind of informal social connection there. You can observe other people doing things, feel a bit more connected to society than sitting alone in your home. That can be really important for your health. Attention restoration is one of the theories that I was suggesting earlier that Olmsted and Vox maybe sort of intuited in their 19th century understanding. Developed by Rachel and Stephen Kaplan, this theory is that essentially we know that directed attention that we use when we're reading a book or staring at our computer screen or crossing a busy road, dealing with a busy urban environment, negotiating even just a busy pavement or a street, that directed attention becomes exhausted. We all know that. If we work for 4 hours solid, we stop being as effective and we need to take a break. And the Kaplans have looked at what are the environments that support the best kind of restorative environment, and they have a number of characteristics. Being away from the source of the focused attention, obviously compatible with our mood. It has to be a place we like and feel comfortable. It has to have extent. It's not something that's just sort of in your face. It's not like a picture on a screen. It's something that's got a bit going on beyond the in your face. But perhaps most important for sort of us thinking about the theory of what it is about landscape that's offering benefit, it offers effortless fascination. So if you think about watching waves coming on the shore, the flames in a fire, light flickering through leaves and the tree in the wind, birdsong, the ripple of water, the sound of water, These are all natural qualities that the environment offers, which we find endlessly engaging. You know, you can sit and watch the waves on the shore for a long time. It doesn't require effort. You're not having to focus, having to work at looking at it, but it engages you in a kind of relaxed way. This soft fascination is posited as being one of the mechanisms by which we relax and we move into a kind of more restful mode, which is good for our physiology. And then there are, and this is linked to attention restoration theory, there are also increasing numbers of projects that show evidence of independent psychophysiological responses. So it seems that there are many things within our body that respond to certain kinds of natural environments, or the qualities in them, or the microbiome in them, that we have no direct conscious control over, but they happen anyway. They're, perhaps you could say, hardwired into our system. We know that parasympathetic nerve activity is enhanced by being in natural environments. Now, sympathetic nerve activity is the fight or flight mode. Something is threatening you, or you need to have all your energy for something that requires very directed attention and urgent action. That's good. We need those skills. We need that sympathetic nerve activity, but too much of that for too long is unhealthy for us. And we need to relax. We need to be in the rest and digest mode that parasympathetic nerve activity enhances. And natural green spaces are considered very good for that. There's a whole range of projects and many references. If you're interested, I can point you to some of them afterwards. Forest bathing, a tradition in Japan, Shinrin-yoku, of going for a walk in the forest and breathing in the phenols in the air that the plants produce, is a long-standing tradition that's supposed to be good for your health. And now people have undertaken a lot of research that shows that, yep, it really does make a difference to your health. And there is really interesting evidence recently about the whole microbiome, not my area of expertise, I should say, but fascinating, that suggests that there's all kinds of things going on in the natural environment that we can access if we're in a green and natural space that we can't access if we're in a hard, paved, built urban environment with no natural things growing in it. Plants can offer phytoncides, which are antimicrobial organic compounds that we can breathe in the air. They reduce blood pressure. Walking, Shinrin-yoku and other kinds of natural environments boost immune functioning. Apparently there are natural killer cells that forests or natural environments enhance the system's anti-cancer cells. And I've recently read this paper, which I reference here, and if you can't see it, you can get it in the PDF afterwards, on microbiota in our gut that have neurotransmitters that link with neural responses from the brain, through the brain cell, through the stem cells. And being in a natural environment and ingesting these microbiota enhances more positive neurotransmission, and you then get a sort of positive loop feedback. Fascinating stuff, as I said, not my area of expertise, but interestingly, just suggesting that really it is good for our health, not just psychologically, but physiologically, being in green and natural environments. Now, lots of detail about that I know some of you are researching at the moment, so we don't have all the answers, but there is already evidence to suggest there's really important things going on here. As a designer, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, I'm interested in how we can encourage use. If we think access to green and blue space is good for our health, what about people who don't go there very often? How can we encourage more people to feel welcome in these spaces? And these are just some examples from many. I've worked with the Forestry Commission Scotland, now Scottish Forestry, for many years on different projects looking at health and salutogenic environments in woodland environments. These two photographs on the left are the kind of public places that are accessible, are open to the public, but if you hadn't been there before, particularly perhaps if you were a woman on your own feeling a bit nervous, you might think, not sure I want to go down that path. It doesn't look very welcoming. You're not sure what you're going to meet around the corner. Whereas the two images on the right are very clearly welcoming. They say, come in. The one on the right says, even if you've got a child in a pushchair, even if you're a wheelchair user, this is accessible to you. You're welcome. Come in. And it doesn't doesn't say using signs. Signs are very useful. I'm not denying their value, but the design alone is open, is welcoming, suggests you're not going to feel threatened or overly enclosed in a way that is uncomfortable for you if you move into that space. So design is important, and there are ways we've worked with Forestry Commission on trying to help forest managers understand how to make these places naturally look welcoming. This is another example of the Olmsted and Vaux Park, Prospect Park in Brooklyn that I just love, because it's this beautiful tunnel. This is the carriage road, the bridge on top, the carriage road, which was for the rich people to drive their horse-drawn carriages around and show off their horses to other people in the park. But for the poorer people who didn't have horses or horse-drawn carriages but were coming on foot, they would come through this tunnel. But it's got a beautiful wooden interior that reflects the light, the sort of aptly green light of the green lawn beyond, in a way that just makes it very inviting. It doesn't look threatening. It looks very encouraging. It looks as if it's drawing you into that lovely green space. Now, biological pathways are important. We've done some work on this. We know that chronic stress leads to wear and tear on the body. So chronic stress is not just bad for you mentally, it physiologically damages your telomeres. It's bad for you physiologically. This allostatic load, as it's called, will influence physical as well as mental health. And we did some work, and again, I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail, but using the diurnal pattern of cortisol, which is an indicator of your overall stress and health levels. It relates to your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis in your body, which sort of controls different hormones and hormonal systems. And we were looking at the daily pattern of cortisol, which in a healthy person goes up sharply in the first 30 minutes or so of waking up, and then drops quite steeply during the day. We found different patterns in men than women, but we found we could predict a healthy pattern by whether there was in mapping in terms of objectively measured green space, more green space near where people lived than less. And we were looking at a deprived population in Scotland. Our participants were people who were out of work, living in deprived communities. So they were living in a deprived context, and they were people who were worried about where their income was going to come from. They were looking for work. So this was more by luck than a lot of good planning, but also a bit of luck. We got some results that were really even more startling than we expected, and got quite a lot of attention from the World Health Organization as a result of that. So a different pattern for men than for women, as I said. Men seem to be, their cortisol level went up and then didn't drop if they had less green space. So they were sort of alert in the morning, but then never really calmed down during the day. Women had a low flat pattern, which suggested burnout, long-term fatigue, post-traumatic disorder even. So stressed in different ways in these deprived communities where people were looking for work. We also found links with social well-being, and this is where we're trying to look at the pathways between green space and health and stress. A sense of place belonging was associated with more green space, and that in turn predicted lower stress. So maybe that's one of the pathways. And those of you who are garden enthusiasts will know this already, but having access to a place where you can grow things was also linked with feeling that you belong to the place and social connectedness, and these in turn also predicted lower stress. So some possible social pathways or mediators in this link. The stress in all cases being measured by cortisol, but also by self-report. We match the two up. Now, there are other mechanisms that are maybe at work here, and I'll briefly touch on them. Not all of these are areas that I've done research in, but although we need to be careful about getting cancer, we do also know that we need sunlight as one of the best ways of enhancing vitamin D. We need sunlight on our skin to metabolize that. As we get older, sometimes we have trouble sleeping, and circadian rhythms are much better if we have access to outdoor environments and the light, the sunlight, the quality of light that we get in outdoor environments. Vitamin D, of course, is very important for us women in particular. As we age, we worry about bone density, all kinds of other things. So really important. You know, you won't get access to sunlight if you're stuck inside. We also know that air pollution has been, for many years, one of the most damaging things in most of our living environments, particularly if we live in an urban area. It's been damaging our health for decades. We sort of took our eye off the ball a bit on that for a while, but it's come back now. And Payam Dadvand and others, Mark Neuvenhuizen, have done some research across Europe which show that designed in the right way, green and particulate matter gases and particulate matter can be filtered by green vegetation, so that getting into the park or green space, or even travelling along a road that has a park and green space to one side, may mean that you're less exposed to the damaging pollutants. Sadly, we all know that the globe is heating up. Global warming, global heating is not something that's going to go away anytime soon. And we know that particularly for people who have low income, who can't afford the air conditioning, who live in poorly insulated buildings, green and natural environments may be the only way that they can get access to cooler space during the day, or the green environment may cool the buildings at night. Very important, because this can be lethal, particularly as we get older. Sleeping in too hot an environment can be very bad for your health. And some fascinating work again from across European projects showing that even in the womb, we may be affected by our mother's access to green space, probably through multiple different kinds of pathways that I've described earlier. But healthier birth outcomes were associated in this multinational study, were associated with better access to green space around where our mother lived. We know that childhood play and teenage years are really important in all kinds of developmental ways, and access to green and natural environments seem to be good for children in almost every dimension you can think of. I'm actually working on a very big data set at the moment where we're trying to look at that in relation to woodlands near deprived urban communities. But we know that childhood play in natural settings seems to have long-term positive effect on attitudes, well-being and behaviour. So really important from earliest years, obviously from in the womb even, but early childhood as well. We've done a lot of work with older people. We always try to engage with our participants, not just look at the numbers we get from them, but also ask them to tell us what they think and what they feel. We've had many, many quotes from older people telling us that getting outdoors, getting into the natural environment, seeing the seasons change is really good for our well-being, particularly as we get older, and particularly if we end up perhaps living on our own or being rather socially isolated. And just one example of some of that research that we've been involved with, looking at how close green or blue, your nearest green or blue space is as an older person. This was a study done across the UK, a relatively small sample, but still across the UK. People aged 65 plus, in our participants who live within 10 minutes walk of the local open space were twice as likely to achieve recommended healthy levels of walking, 30 minutes a day, at least 5 days a week, compared with those whose nearest park was further away. And they were also more than twice as likely to be satisfied with life. So quality of life as we age, really important, and access to good quality green space nearby seems to make a difference, a big difference to that. Now, this is an example of an illustration by some of our architecture and landscape architecture students in the university, our master's students who were working with us on a project a few years ago, Mobility, Mood and Place, focused on older people and how we can design collaboratively with older people to make mobility easy and enjoyable. We worked in Manchester, in Edinburgh, in London, so a number of different locations, also in Orkney. These full of things came up time and again that our older participants told us mattered to them. Inclusivity, access for all, so we're not unthinkingly excluding some people ourselves, or perhaps people who might visit us because of barriers, physical barriers in the environment, to accessibility. Access to nature, really important. Access to others, so that's social contact, and access to light. Right, as our eyesight gets a bit worse for many of us in older age, actually good, bright, natural light is very good for being able to see, for being able to read, for being able to do pastimes and activities, whether it's woodwork or sewing or whatever. So that bright light can be psychologically mood enhancing as well as practically helpful. And this design is just one example of something that is actually really important in terms of access to outdoor environments. It's just one example by some students of a kind of modern peristyle or portico where you can be in a sheltered place, you're not out in the elements, you're not out in the rain if it's raining, you're sheltered, protected, you're not in the middle of things, but you can see what's going on, you can get a sense of what's the weather like, what's the temperature like. You're not completely outdoors, but you're not indoors either. The peristyle or the cloister or the courtyard is the historic version of this that works incredibly well. If you see someone go by and you want to chat, you can spot them, you can lean out or you can go out, you can explore that environment, but you can suss it out without committing fully to being out there. And it's that threshold between outdoors and indoors. If it's designed well, that makes it easy to opt to go out, easy to test the water a bit, see what it's like. Yeah, okay, oh, I need my coat. I'll put my coat on before I go out. If you don't have a good threshold, it's much harder to enjoy that outdoor, and similarly coming back in. And here's just a nice example I came across when we were in Norway with colleagues. This beautiful sort of portico here. This is glass. So this guy sitting in here is sitting in lovely low angle sunlight because it's quite late in the year, enjoying the sunshine, not in the wind because this glass protects him from the wind. But the people, younger people sitting out in the open, they don't mind about the wind so much, they want to be out in the open air, out in the sunshine there. So this is a lovely example of a beautifully designed threshold. Now, just looking a bit more at some evidence now and moving towards some more recent projects I've worked on. This is the picture that always gets all the journalists interested. Something looking key. One of our lovely PhD students wearing a mobile neuro headset. This was very exploratory work. Since we did this study not that long ago, it's urgent. Lots of other people are doing similar things. But we managed to get our hands on one of the earliest versions of something that measured neural activity, brain activity, but that was mobile. So instead of sitting in a lab, you could actually go out into the real environment. So this has ecological validity. I'm a great believer in research out in the wild, in real places, real environments where we really are, not the virtual environment. And I know a lot of people do research with virtual environments, but I like the real thing. So you wear a backpack with the computer that collects the data. And we were interested in engaging plucky older participants to wear this thing, which is a bit attention grabbing perhaps, and go out and about in different environments in Edinburgh. And we looked at patterns of neural behaviour. So we looked at what happens in a busy urban street, in a green space, not the best possible green space ever, but a typical, slightly run-down urban green space in Edinburgh, and what we call urban quiet, which was a residential street that had gardens in front of the houses, a bit of green, but mostly built. And you can see the urban busy's got traffic and shops and maybe busy pavements. And what we found, interestingly, was that the low beta pattern, now low beta is associated with alert states or directed attention. I've got to pay attention. Particularly as we get older, our balance may not be so good, our peripheral vision may go a bit. Someone coming up suddenly from behind may make us feel a bit more like we're going to lose our balance. Negotiating a bustling pavement, looking both ways to see where the traffic's coming from. Suddenly there's a siren, what's that? That can all be very stressful, actually, in terms of demanding our attention just to go down the street, go to the shops, get to what we need to do to buy food or whatever. What we see here is that the blue is in urban busy and the green is urban green. We don't see a mirror image. When you go from urban busy with this very high demand on low beta activity into the green space, it drops very dramatically initially, and then it sort of levels out a bit. But if you go from the green space into the urban busy, you don't get the mirror image. And that suggests that there's something about the calming effect of the green space that allows people to, perhaps their directed attention has been restored by being in the green space. So there's not such a demand on low beta activity when they go into the urban busy. Now, very experimental, very early stages of exploring this kind of research, and I know other people have done other work on this since. So, and I'm not a neuroscience expert, but it was very interesting, and it does suggest that this idea of involuntary attention, the soft fascination of the natural environment that is posited in attention restoration theory, may be behind those patterns that we saw. Now, one of the groups that I've worked with a lot in research is my colleagues in health geography, CRESH, and we worked with them on a number of projects. I'm still working with them. One of these looked at environmental histories to look at the influence of places over the life course of people. So we've been working with the Lothian birth cohort who were born in 1936. Our psychology colleagues went back and tracked them again. So here's a pattern. So they were born in 36. In 1947, all school children aged 11 did a mental survey, a sort of IQ test. And the results, if they have been stored somewhere, are still available. So someone had the bright idea in the early 2000s of saying, let's see if we can find those people from Lothian and Edinburgh and track them down now. You can give them the same test you gave them at age 11, and see what difference it is. But neuroscience, cognitive science has moved on. So they're doing all kinds of other things with this cohort of people that they've done various data gathering exercises in as they've moved into their 70s and 80s. Obviously, you can see the sample size reduces as age goes on. And of course, does tend to be the more middle class, wealthier, who survive on average better than the more economically deprived. Nonetheless, a really interesting cohort that we can study into old age. And what we did was, as part of our Mobility Moving Place project, at this point, we were allowed to have access to this cohort. They get asked all kinds of questions and they get given all kinds of tests. So the people who look after them are very nervous of anything added to the demands on them. But we were allowed to ask them where they'd lived every decade of their lives. And we gave them little memory jogs about different things that happened over the course of their lives that were sort of national news, to help them remember where they might have lived. So we've got a map of a large number of that cohort who lived in Edinburgh Lothian region. We know every decade of their lives into the 70s and 80s where they lived. And then we looked at a number of other environmental attributes. So this is just looking at public parks in Edinburgh in 1914, 49, 69, 2009. They haven't changed that dramatically, but they have changed a bit. Really, just to give you an idea, we looked at, there were all kinds of different public health surveys, building condition surveys to get estimates of quality of the environment and so on. This is just one of the things we were looking at. But this shows you each of the black dots is an individual in the birth cohort, and we're looking at access within a certain distance to a public park for when they lived at a certain stage of life. And so we can see whether they did or didn't have nearby access to a park at each decade of their lives. And we see in the data lifelong associations between those two. So this is something that has attracted quite a bit of interest because it wasn't clear whether or not we would find that. And again, my health geography, lovely colleagues in health geography are much more expert in some of the details of the analysis than I. But essentially, we're looking at a more recent project's been looking at air pollution and neighbourhood deprivation as well as green space over the life course. And we've been looking, and there are different theories about how this might influence your health. Is it just you accumulate either more air pollution or more access to green space? Or are there critical periods when access to these things makes more or less difference? And we've been looking at a whole range of outcomes that our clever colleagues in psychology have been gathering data on. So cognitive change as we age, frailty, mental health, biological aging, looking at telomere health, and other indicators of brain health that are way beyond my expertise to understand in detail. Looking at green space and cognitive aging. So most of us, sadly, as we get older, we do have some cognitive decline as we go into very old age. No change in that associated with access to green space before 70, but once people got into their later 70s, we found that childhood seemed to be a particularly sensitive period. We could find marks in the data, significant influence of childhood access to green space in how gentle the cognitive decline was once people were over 70. So that's really interesting, that long influence, because childhood, not surprisingly perhaps, is a critical period. And we also found that was enhanced then by access to green space in adulthood, perhaps not surprisingly. And we also found this effect was strongest among women rather than men and people of lower socioeconomic status. So really important in thinking about health inequalities. Another outcome that people looked at, thank you, yep. Anxiety and depression. So green space influence over the life course is limited in terms of anxiety and depression in older age to the most socially disadvantaged neighbourhoods. And again, we find access to green space during childhood makes a difference to how anxious or depressed we are in our older age. And for anxiety, every decade of life near more green space makes a difference for this socially disadvantaged neighbourhood population once they're over 70. And we're continuing to do research in this. I'm involved in the Advanced Care Research Centre, and I know we have colleagues working on different projects, some of which include Stirling University, but interested in how we can consider projects that people have individual desires to follow that help them flourish in older age. But we need to think about people with no good childhood experience of natural green or blue space. How do we help those? How do we support those? We also are very much aware that access in childhood is really, really important. We've talked to people. These are just some quotes from participants in work with Forestry Commission from a while ago now. Again, as I said, we try to listen to our participants, not test them and analyse their numbers, telling us that access to woodlands nearby made a difference to them when they were unemployed. They could chill, they could get away from it all, they could clear their head, they didn't need money. And we've been involved in some work, actually we're involved in a subsequent project of this, Woods in and Around Towns research. This was a first phase, and some of the results, a complicated result that showed there was a signal that suggested that access to green space in woods in particular was making a difference to mental health, but it wasn't significant enough to warrant a full scale. Yes, we found the answer to everything. But if you look at the cost, just the right-hand thing, we know that poor mental health costs billions to the economy. And the cost of Woods in and Around Town project is about £15 per person, compared with the cost per person of poor mental health of something like £2,000 to the economy of Scotland. So even if we can make a little difference with environments, that could have a huge effect in terms of cost effectiveness. And I'll just dash through. Those of you who are researchers know I need to mention my research projects. We've been working with Edinburgh City on thriving green spaces, developing a 30-year plan for the future of their green spaces, how we can help them, how we can work with local communities to satisfy their needs and encourage them to ask for more and find ways of funding it, a big challenge. And that's part of a Future Parks initiative across the UK. Again, you will get these links afterwards so you can follow them up, but several other cities, we're the only one in Scotland, in Edinburgh, that got funding, but there are a number in England that got funding, and they're working together on enhancing parks. I'm also part of the Groundswell Consortium, that's a multi-centre consortium researching urban green and blue space for health. And as part of that, we're working with the City Council as well and the community to co-design. We're using citizen science as part of understanding what people get out of parks or what they want to get out of parks. So Groundswell's another big multidisciplinary project led by Queen's University Belfast, with Edinburgh and Liverpool as the main partners, but a number of other researchers contributing as well. If anyone's interested, you're probably past this stage, but we have got a master's program in landscape and wellbeing as well. Share that with your friends. And the final just few slides are really just to summarize all of what I've said. When I was asked to do some research with, or combine a sort of literature, a rapid review for the World Health Organization in Europe, I was asked to go and talk to the advisors to the health ministers of all the countries in WHO Europe's region. I had sort of 10 minutes to tell them why green space mattered in terms of health as opposed to all the other things. And so I produced these slides just to try and get the message across very clearly. What types of green space does a city need? You need it nearby, easily visible, ideally from where you sit and do your daily work. You need small private or public areas, but they need to be nearby at a local scale where your kids can play, where you can sit and chill out, where teenagers can gather and not have other people say, why don't you get lost? Places where different parts, different groups in society can gather nearby, easy to get to within walking distance, 5 or 10 minutes, so people don't use them. Green infrastructure networks. We all know we should be engaging in active travel if we don't have to cycle or walk near busy, polluted roads, but attractive but safe feeling green and natural environments, so much the better. And they need to get to the places we want to go to. And of course, we need larger parks, we need natural areas, we need wild areas for all kinds of different things, from social gatherings to wildlife. Where do we need it? We need it near to where we live, where we work, where we play. It needs to be accessible to us, even if we don't have a car. And this is just one of many different bits of literature review, but one that I contributed to that you can get access to if you want to. It's a bit out of date now, 2016, but one example that you can get online if you want to look at some of the references, and a follow-up that looked at interventions that might have impact on health. And there's our Open Space website, and I'm very happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. So we've got kind of about 5 minutes or so for questions. If you have them, I'll just like that.
Yep.
So I'll give preference to those that are in the room over those that are on Teams. But if you're on Teams, then you can, of course, put something in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll try and get to you if we've got time. So, any questions for Catherine? Here and then back maybe after.
The study with cognitive performance in older adults when they had access to green spaces when they were much younger, were elements such as, say, education, attainment, that controlled for?
Lots of things were controlled for. Off the top of my head, I can't tell you whether educational attainment specifically was, but I think probably the age leaving school was. We do know, obviously, that educational attainment is a predictor of socioeconomic status, and in turn that is like to predict health and cognition and other things. So in some way this would have been controlled for, but I can't promise is that educational attainment was specifically, but I can give you the references and we can check afterwards.
Thank you very much for your presentation, very interesting. And my question is, can you tell us about a little bit more about the private community investigating, and if there is any other factor beyond green spaces, income, as you mentioned, that might affect their health?
Well, there's a whole area of social connectedness and feeling of community that can make a difference, and not really my area of expertise, but we know that, on the one hand, there is the sort of traditional image of a working class community where everyone works together. There may actually be a very strong sense of local community, which we know psychologically and physiologically can be good for health. But that can also be something that excludes some people who are not part of that group. So there's talk about social bonding and social bridging as different elements of social connectedness, where bridging is bridging between different groups and bonding is bonding within a sort of self-identified group. So I think it's actually quite complicated. in practice, and not an area that I'm interested in. Some research that I read a while ago now suggested that actually poorer neighbourhoods tend to have the busy roads near them, near the housing areas, wherever. I suppose it's the converse is, if you've got money and you can buy somewhere nice, why would you buy it near a busy road if you can buy it a bit further away? So there's probably more exposure to aerial pollution from poorer neighbourhoods. I suspect that may be a stronger influence than perhaps has been fully acknowledged until recently. I don't know. Is that...
Well, thank you. I just want to know what type of the private community investigate in your views research.
What type of community?
Yeah. Where is it?
Well, we've looked at communities in Edinburgh, we've looked at communities in Dundee, we've looked at communities in Aberdeen, we've worked in co-design with communities in Manchester, in the East End of London. So, yeah, not everywhere by any means. And our Groundswell project is working with colleagues in Belfast and in Liverpool, where you'll be aware, these are both post-industrial cities that have pockets of deprivation there. So we're sort of learning from them and sharing experience and knowledge at the moment on those communities as well. Glasgow, of course, sorry, I should have mentioned Glasgow. The Glasgow effect, yes. We have worked in Glasgow too.
Thank you.
Yes, it's interesting to ask. When you're looking at the green spaces, is it official green spaces which you consider other green spaces, unofficial ones as well, or is it just official green spaces?
Yeah, good question. What counts?
Spatial distribution between official ones and non-official ones.
Yeah.
Actual green spaces.
Yeah. So different studies have used different definitions, and sometimes it depends on what we're comparing with or who our collaborators are. But a good question. And yes, there is, if you look at all the green and natural environment, and James Hutton Institute produced sort of green space maps that include all those different versions of that. So we can include them all, and GIS mapping can allow us. And some people, the NDVI vegetation index based on Landsat imagery or whatever can tell us about what green there is out there, regardless of whether it's public or private, accessible or not accessible. The challenge is, of course, that some of that might be a private golf course. Some of that might look very lovely and green and lush and be doing something for people's health nearby, but not actually usable by them. So for the sort of aging project, we were looking at official public parks. So we knew these were publicly accessible. Sometimes it depends on the size of the data set, whether we can go down and look at for each individual person or case, we can go and sort of check through and look at, is this public or is it private? We can refine that database. But we also do sensitivity testing. So sometimes we'll sort of say, okay, well, if we include everything, or if we just include the public spaces, do we get a different result? I think private gardens are a different matter as opposed to green space that's not private to your own home. Well, maybe if you're a grand landowner, but for most of us, there does seem to be a difference in terms of benefit that you get from public or community green space and what it might be if it's just your private garden. So we try to differentiate between those two.
I think we're one more.
I don't know if you work with green space, but do you see similar patterns in green spaces?
Yes, my colleague Simon Bell has been involved in a big European project called Blue Health, where they focused exclusively on spaces, on accessible water environments. So not out in the middle of the sea, but anywhere that's accessible by land that has water. Rivers, canals, coasts, lakes. And some of their evidence suggests that actually the health effects are even stronger. So they're very enthusiastic about that, and they've produced a whole book sort of summarising the findings. And there's still some papers coming out now from that Blue Health project. If you want to sort of Google it, it was an EU Horizon project.
Okay, so we're at time, so it just leaves me to thank Catherine for yet really interesting seminar. Thank you for coming too. So I think Catherine has a bit of time if anyone has any questions.
Sure,
'Cause
yep,
afterwards
yep,
we can
yep.
interact and
Very
stuff,
happy
so,
to.
yeah.